Is it okay if we talk a little bit about the setting of like Second Temple, when this all takes place? I mean, we've spent so much time going through the storyline of the Hebrew Scriptures.
Yeah.
And it just would be nice to just situate our minds in where we're at as that story has been unfolding.
Yeah, got it.
So Israel is its own kingdom.
Monarchy.
Yeah.
Split kingdoms in the north and in the south.
Okay. They've got their own little
Northern
situation.
tribes are all taken out by Assyria in 700s BC. Southern kingdom in Jerusalem, called Judah, they get another 100 plus years, and then Babylon takes them out.
And Babylon takes Assyria out too?
Babylon, for a number of different reasons, Assyria crumbles as a world power, and Babylon's right there to step into the shoes.
Okay.
Babylon doesn't last very long, and in the mid-500s, the Medes and the Persians join forces, and a guy named Cyrus storms the ancient world, and he steps into the shoes of Babylon. And the Persians are on the scene for a couple centuries. The 500s, the 400s, like Esther's, where the story of Esther takes place, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, and all this. And then Alexander the Great storms the ancient world in the late 300s BC, spreading the good news of Greek culture, language, and religion.
Right.
I mean, he went from Greece, his famous storm of his imperial march all the way to India. Yeah. That's where he died. So that's in the 300s, and then he dies.
And at that time, the Hebrew Scriptures were formed.
They're being formed in their final collection.
Yeah,
that's right.
And there's still writings during this time of the other works, right? Like this is...
Oh, yeah. Jewish culture is, I don't know if you'd say they're flourishing, but yeah, they're existing and producing a lot of the literature that is now called the Apocrypha or Pseudepigrapha. But the works at the center of what we call the Hebrew Bible were like they were a main focus and source of inspiration and hope.
Yeah.
So the whole point is for the people living in Jerusalem.
Yeah, just one power after another.
One imperial oppressor after another.
Yeah.
Not all Jews. Then you get a diversity of responses to all of this change of leadership. You got lots of Jews that are like, yeah, I'll do the Greek thing. That sounds awesome. We'll get a gymnasium in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Was where all the men hang out naked. That's what that means. And do sports and sit in the baths and talk about Plato and
it's very Greek.
Debate politics and so on. And so, Jews are under pressure since men are naked in the public square a lot in Greek culture. Circumcision becomes an embarrassment if you want to be like the powerful
in crowd.
Yep. So Jerusalem, Judaism becomes a diverse movement with diverse responses to the cultural change, like any religious movement.
Yeah.
So once Alexander the Great dies, his massive empire from Greece to all the way to India gets divided up into dozens of little smaller blocks. And then that begins about a century and a half of just human nature. Just like humans, it's just...
everyone trying to carve out their power niche.
So, and it becomes a back and forth between the rulers over the land of Egypt after Alexander and the rulers over the land of Syria, north of Israel, Palestine. They're constantly traveling up and down through the land of Israel, Palestine, taking Israel, Palestine back from each other.
Wow.
Just changes hands back and forth. Lots of battles, lots of bloodshed.
Wow.
Jerusalem gets taken over many times.
Yeah.
One Syrian king named Antiochus Epiphanes comes into Jerusalem after being humiliated and unable to defeat the Egyptians, and he takes it out on the Jews in Jerusalem. And this is that famous.
Yeah. See the little horn?
He is a primary figure in the portrait of the little horn.
Yeah.
But the whole point, actually, is you're referring to the book of Daniel.
Yeah.
But the book of Daniel portrays the actions of Antiochus by mapping them onto the actions of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and of the kings of Assyria. They all become...
It becomes this meta.
Yeah, it's just foreign rulers who are power hungry and oppressive and violent.
Yeah.
So it's just all of them.
Right. So then Rome comes in.
Well, no. So then you have the successful Jewish revolt, the first successful Jewish revolt.
The Maccabees.
Of the Maccabees. Mm-hmm. And so this is in the 150s. And they found the first independent Jewish state since Babylon came to town 400 years earlier. Mm-hmm. And they found a renewed Jewish state. They rededicate the temple. And you've got Jewish priests, kings in their own land for it lasts about a century until the 50s BC. And that century it descends into madness. You can read the main account comes to us from Josephus, who's a Jewish historian from later time period, and it's just one assassination bloodbath after another. People are buying the high priesthood, selling it to the highest bidder. Okay, so that Jewish state becomes so internally divided and weak that when
it's ripe for the picking.
That's right. And then the next right after, then Rome rises to power over the ancient world, and Rome comes and easily scoops up this province and incorporates it into the empire.
Yeah.
And then they appoint a semi-Jewish royal figure over the land, and his name is Herod the Great.
So Herod he's part Jewish. And he's appointed by Rome.
Yep.
This would be Caesar, the first Caesar.
In the late 40s BC.
Yeah.
And so he is decades into his reign when Jesus is born.
Okay.
So this is the Herod that we meet in the birth stories of Jesus in Matthew and Luke.
Okay.
So he's decades into his reign, extremely wealthy, extremely corrupt. Like he's assassinated his own family members because he suspected them of treason.
Yeah.
And there have been, by the time Jesus is born, we have had multiple revolts and rebellions.
So he's constantly dealing with all these Jewish rebellions.
Yep. We're also in the time period where Daniel, the 7 times 70 years.
Yeah, that should be coming up.
Until the restoration. In Daniel chapter 9. We're in the century. The basic, people debated exactly.
So if you are counting that down as like, this is when we get our freedom again.
Correct.
You're like, something's going to happen.
Something's going to happen.
So it's in the air.
And
There's rebellion's in the air.
That's right. And so you can mark it like right around the time period that attentive readers of the scriptures would be expecting Daniel's prayer of the restoration of Jerusalem to come about. You start to see in the historical record all these rebel movements pop up. And some of them are mentioned in the book of Acts. Wait, are you that Egyptian who led a few thousand people out of here?
When Paul goes back to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just one. So it's, we just have to imagine ourselves. I am living on my ancestral homeland.
Okay.
For the last half millennium, we have not been able to rule ourselves except for a blip of a century that turned into an infighting bloodbath.
Okay.
The scriptures tell me that the glory days of David and Solomon are going to come again, and that we're going to, as a whole people, become a light to the nations by being faithful to our God, as God wanted from the beginning, through Abraham and Moses. I live in a militarized zone, occupied by Roman legionaries.
Yeah,
they're marching through. There are, if let's say I just grew up in the same period Jesus did, I would have seen Roman soldiers marching through. I probably would have seen multiple crucifixions, mass crucifixions, as I journeyed to and from.
Things. Yeah.
Yep. Jews being crucified.
Yeah.
By my uncle. You know what I mean? My cousin.
He said the wrong thing, or he incited.
Yeah, or you've almost certainly got a cousin or a second cousin who went to join some guerrilla war group up in the hills of Galilee.
Yeah,
and they perform raids down on the Romans. And
what was the term again for people who lived out in the hills?
Oh, the Laestes, the rebel, the brigand.
Yeah.
It gets translated criminal or robber.
Right.
But it's rebel.
Yeah, one of the people out in the hills inciting rebellion.
Correct. Yeah, the Laestes. Jesus is crucified between two Laestes.
Right, okay.
As a Laestes.
Yes.
And that Greek word refers to these Jewish guerrilla groups that were resisting Roman occupation.
Right.
Yep. So just try to imagine living. There are lots of people right now who live in militarized zones, who live under a foreign occupier.
Yeah.
Imagine. Yeah, let's try and imagine ourselves in there. And it's into that setting that the Jesus story is born.